I still remember the smell of the rain on the asphalt the night everything started to fall apart. It was one of those heavy, oppressive Midwestern summer downpours that makes the whole world feel like it's trapped inside a humid green glass jar. I was sitting in my truck in the driveway of our suburban house, windshield wipers slapping a steady, hypnotic rhythm against the glass, just staring at the glowing windows of the place I had spent the last 7 years building. Inside that house was Sarah, my wife, the woman I'd loved since our college days at Ohio State, and Marcus, my absolute best friend since we were literal kids throwing rocks at trains behind the local middle school. Marcus had been sleeping on our living room couch for the last 3 weeks after his life completely imploded. His engagement had ended in a messy, financially devastating breakup, and as his brother in everything but blood, I hadn't even hesitated. I told him our door was open for as long as he needed. Sarah had agreed, of course, because she knew how much Marcus meant to me. She'd made up the guest linens, cleared out a dresser, and welcomed him with open arms. We were a team. That's what I kept telling myself. My job as a regional logistics manager meant I was on the road a lot, driving between distribution centers scattered across 3 states. It was exhausting, soul-crushing work sometimes, but it paid the mortgage on our beautiful 3-bedroom colonial and kept us comfortable.
This particular trip was supposed to keep me in Indianapolis until Friday evening, but a major supply chain meeting got canceled early on Thursday afternoon. Instead of staying another night in a sterile, lonely highway motel, I decided to surprise Sarah. I wanted to walk through the front door, drop my duffel bag on the hardwood floor, and pull her into my arms while Marcus laughed from the kitchen, maybe offering to order some cheap takeout so we could all catch up. I was running on 4 hours of sleep and 3 cups of terrible gas station coffee, but the thought of my own bed and my wife's smile kept me awake for the 3-hour drive home. When I finally pulled into the driveway around 11 at night, I noticed Marcus's battered old silver sedan wasn't there. I assumed he was out at a bar somewhere, trying to drown his sorrows, or maybe finally going out on one of those casual dates he'd been talking about to get over his ex. The house was quiet, almost dark, except for the dim, warm light coming from our upstairs bedroom window. I smiled to myself, unlocking the front door as quietly as possible so I wouldn't wake Sarah if she was already asleep. The house smelled faintly of vanilla and lavender, Sarah's favorite candles. I kicked off my muddy boots in the entryway, the silence of the house wrapping around me like a heavy blanket. As I walked past the living room, I noticed Marcus's blanket was neatly folded on the edge of the sofa. Everything looked completely normal, just a regular Thursday night in suburbia. I started walking up the carpeted stairs, my heart doing a little flutter of anticipation. I couldn't wait to see the look of surprise on Sarah's face when I crept into the room. But then, as I reached the top landing, a strange sensation washed over me. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic realization. It was a slow, creeping chill that started at the base of my neck. The door to our bedroom wasn't closed all the way. It was cracked open about an inch, letting a thin sliver of amber light spill out onto the hallway floor. And then I heard it. It wasn't a sound I recognized immediately, or maybe my brain just flat out refused to process what it actually was. It was a low, muffled murmur, followed by a soft, familiar laugh. It was Sarah's laugh, but it didn't sound the way it did when we were watching a comedy together or when I told a stupid joke. It was deeper, more intimate, almost breathless. My breath hitched in my throat. Every muscle in my body froze instantly, my hand hovering just inches from the brass doorknob. I told myself I was crazy. I told myself she was probably just watching a movie on her iPad or talking to her sister on the phone. But then came the second voice, a deep, rumbling baritone that I had known for 20 years. "You think he's ever going to figure it out?" Marcus whispered. His voice sounded different too, stripped of its usual loud, boisterous bravado, replaced by a dark, heavy confidence that made my stomach violently drop. "No," Sarah replied, her voice sounding incredibly small, yet terrifyingly clear through the narrow gap in the door. "He's too trusting. He thinks everyone is as good of a person as he is. It's almost sad." The world seemed to spin on its axis. The air in the hallway became so thick I could barely breathe. My hand began to tremble violently against the drywall. I leaned forward just an inch, my eye aligning with the crack in the doorframe, praying to whatever God was listening that I was misinterpreting the situation, that this was some horrific, twisted nightmare my exhausted brain had cooked up on the long drive home. Through the sliver of space, I saw them. They were sitting on the edge of our bed, the bed I had picked out with Sarah at a local furniture store 2 summers ago. Marcus was sitting with his back against the headboard, his arm draped casually over Sarah's bare shoulders. She was wearing one of my old college t-shirts, the oversized gray one she always wore when she wanted to be comfortable. She was leaning against his chest, her fingers idly tracing patterns on his forearm. The familiarity, the sheer casualness of the posture was what cut the deepest. This wasn't a sudden, drunken mistake. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. This was an established routine. They looked like a couple who had been together for years, completely comfortable in their shared space, completely unbothered by the ghost of the man who actually owned the house. "I feel bad sometimes," Marcus said, though there wasn't a single shred of actual remorse in his tone. He reached down, running his fingers through her long dark hair, pulling her head back gently so he could look into her eyes. "He's doing all this for me, letting me stay here, and we're doing this under his roof." Sarah let out a soft, dismissive sigh, shifting her weight so she was looking up at him. "Don't do that, Marcus. Don't ruin this. You know how things have been between us for the last year. He's never here. He's always choosing his job, always chasing the next promotion, the next bonus. I was so lonely before you moved in. You brought life back into this place." Every single word felt like a physical blow to my chest. I felt a hot, blinding surge of adrenaline flood my system, followed immediately by a crushing, paralyzing wave of pure grief. My best friend, my wife, the 2 pillars of my existence, sitting on my bed, discussing my flaws as a justification for destroying my life. I wanted to kick the door open. I wanted to scream until my lungs gave out, to tear the room apart, to throw Marcus through the window and demand answers. But a strange, cold numbness took over my survival instinct. A voice in the back of my mind, cold and calculating, told me to stay quiet. If I reacted now, if I blew up the room in a fit of rage, they would see my weakness. They would see how completely they had broken me. I stood there in the dark hallway for what felt like an eternity, watching them whisper to each other, watching Marcus lean down to kiss the top of her head, watching my wife smile up at the man I had called my brother. They had no idea I was there. They were completely insulated in their own little world of betrayal. I stepped back, my bare feet making absolutely no sound on the plush carpet. I carefully backed away from the door, down the stairs, and out into the cool, rainy night, closing the front door behind me with a gentle click. I got back into my truck, turned the key, and drove away into the darkness, my mind spinning out of control as I tried to figure out what the hell I was going to do next. I drove aimlessly for hours through the pouring rain, the rhythmic slapping of the windshield wipers the only sound filling the cabin of my truck. The digital clock on the dashboard ticked past 2, then 3 in the morning, its harsh blue glow reflecting off the tears I didn't even realize were streaming down my face. I felt completely unmoored, like a ghost haunting the perimeter of my own life. Every landmark I passed, the local diner where Sarah and I had Sunday brunch, the hardware store where Marcus and I bought the wood to build our backyard deck, felt like a cruel mockery of the reality I thought I knew. The 2 people I trusted most in the entire world hadn't just stabbed me in the back. They had rearranged my entire existence into a lie while I was out breaking my back to provide for them. Eventually, the adrenaline gave way to a hollow, exhausting numbness. I pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour Walmart on the edge of town, killed the engine, and just sat there under the buzzing, sterile glare of the parking lot lights. My mind was racing, replaying every single interaction from the past 3 weeks. Every time Marcus had given me a hearty clap on the shoulder and thanked me for being such a great friend. Every time Sarah had kissed my cheek before I left for a long road trip, telling me to drive safely and that she couldn't wait for me to get home. Had they been laughing at me the entire time? How long had this actually been going on? Sarah said she was lonely for the last year, but Marcus had only been living with us for less than a month. The realization hit me like a physical punch to the gut.
His sudden, messy breakup with his fiancée probably wasn't because of financial issues. It was entirely possible his ex-fiancée had found out about him and Sarah. I checked my phone. There were no missed calls, no texts. They were completely asleep, wrapped up in each other in my bed, totally oblivious to the fact that the foundation of their secret world had just shattered. Part of me wanted to drive back, storm into the house with a baseball bat, and cause a scene that the entire neighborhood would talk about for years. But a darker, more calculating instinct took over. If I went in there screaming, I would be the unhinged, angry husband. They would deny it, gaslight me, cover their tracks, and I would be left holding nothing but my own rage. I needed proof. I needed to see exactly how deep this rot went before I pulled the trigger on my entire life. As the sun began to peek through the heavy gray clouds around 6 a.m, I finally put the truck in drive and headed back toward the suburbs. My hands were steady on the wheel now, a strange, terrifying calm settling over me. When I pulled into the driveway, Marcus's car was still missing. I realized with a sick twist in my stomach that he had probably parked it down the street or around the corner to keep up the illusion that he was out all night. I walked up the front steps, unlocked the door, and deliberately made a lot of noise. I slammed the heavy wooden door shut, dropped my keys onto the entryway table with a loud clatter, and let out a heavy, theatrical sigh of exhaustion. Within 30 seconds, I heard the hurried rustle of movement upstairs. I walked into the kitchen, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, and forced myself to start brewing a pot of coffee. I stood there, staring at the dark liquid dripping into the glass carafe, counting the seconds. "Babe?"
Is that you? Sarah's voice floated down the stairs, sounding thick with sleep, completely normal. Yeah, it's me, I called back, amazed at how steady my own voice sounded. Meeting wrapped up early yesterday afternoon. I drove through the night to surprise you. I heard her footsteps on the hardwood, and then she entered the kitchen. She was wearing a different shirt now, a standard silk robe, and her hair was slightly messy. She looked beautiful, and it made me want to throw up. She walked right up to me, wrapping her arms around my waist and pressing her face into my chest. I froze for a fraction of a second, every muscle in my body screaming at me to push her away, but I forced myself to wrap my arms around her. She smelled like that vanilla and lavender candle. "You should have called me," she murmured against my chest, looking up at me with those wide, innocent eyes that I had fallen in love with a decade ago. "I would have stayed up for you. You must be completely exhausted." "I wanted it to be a surprise," I said, forcing a tight smile, looking down at her. I searched her face for any sign of guilt, any flicker of hesitation, but there was absolutely nothing. She was a masterclass in deception. "Where's Marcus?" His car wasn't out front. Right on cue, the heavy front door opened, and Marcus walked into the house. He was wearing the same clothes I'd seen him in through the crack in the door, but he was carrying a cardboard tray with 3 cups of coffee and a bag of donuts. He looked genuinely startled to see me standing in the kitchen, but he recovered with terrifying speed, a wide, boyish grin spreading across his face. "Man, look who it is!" Marcus boomed, walking into the kitchen and offering me his signature, aggressive high five. "What are you doing back early, brother? I thought you were stuck in Indy until tonight." I took his hand, his grip firm and warm, the exact same grip he'd used when he stood beside me as my best man at my wedding. Meetings got canceled. Drove back through the storm. "Damn, man, you must be wiped," Marcus said, setting the coffee down on the counter. "I just went out to grab some breakfast for Sarah and me. Glad I bought extra. I had to park down the block last night because the street sweeping signs were up on our side, and I didn't want to risk a ticket." It was a perfect lie. It was seamless, logical, and completely fabricated. I looked at the two of them, my wife pouring sugar into a mug, my best friend unpacking glazed donuts onto a plate, and realized I was living with 2 psychopaths. They were acting like a perfectly normal, happy household, completely unfazed by the fact that they had been sleeping together in my bed just hours prior. "Thanks, man," I said, reaching for a donut. My appetite was completely gone, but I forced myself to take a bite. It tasted like ash. "So, how's the job hunt going, Marcus? Found anything promising yet?" Marcus sighed, rubbing the back of his neck with an expression of perfect, fabricated stress. "It's tough out there, man. A few interviews next week, but nothing solid yet. I seriously can't thank you enough for letting me crash here, bro. I don't know where I'd be without you. Don't worry about it, I said, staring directly into his eyes. That's what best friends are for. We look out for each other, no matter what. He nodded, completely missing the dark, icy subtext in my words. Sarah smiled at us, leaning against the counter, looking completely content. I knew right then that I couldn't just confront them. If I did, they would lie, minimize, and extract themselves from the situation with as little damage as possible. No, they had completely destroyed my sense of reality, my home, and my dignity. I wanted to destroy theirs. I needed to gather undeniable evidence, protect my assets, and execute a plan that would leave them with absolutely nothing. I excused myself, claiming I needed to take a shower and sleep off the road fatigue. As I walked up the stairs, leaving them alone in the kitchen, I could already hear them whispering in hushed, hurried tones. The game had officially started. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in psychological warfare, except I was the only one who knew a war was actually being fought. I became an actor in my own life, playing the role of the oblivious, hardworking husband while secretly dismantling everything around us. Every morning, I would get up, kiss Sarah on the cheek, high-five Marcus on my way out the door, and drive to work with a heavy, suffocating knot in my throat. The anger didn't fade. It just hardened into something cold, sharp, and meticulous. I spent my lunch break sitting in my truck, consulting with a high-end family law attorney I'd retained in the city, a woman named Victoria, who specialized in high-stakes, messy divorces. If you want to protect your assets, your house, and your savings, we need concrete proof, Victoria had told me during our first consultation, her voice completely devoid of emotion. In this state, a judge needs undeniable evidence of infidelity if we want to bypass the standard asset split, especially since you're the primary earner. Get the proof, keep your mouth shut, and act like everything is perfectly normal. So that's exactly what I did. I went online and ordered a hidden security camera system disguised as a functional digital alarm clock for our bedroom. I also bought a small, voice-activated audio recorder that I tucked deep into the crevices of the living room couch where Marcus slept. Installing them felt like a betrayal of my own principles, a dirty, underhanded tactic that I never in a million years thought I would have to use against the woman I loved. But the moment I hesitated, I remembered the sound of Sarah's breathless laugh through the crack in the door, and my hands stopped shaking. The first test came on a Tuesday, when I told Sarah I had an overnight trip to Cincinnati. I packed my duffel bag right in front of her, letting her help me fold my shirts. She even made me a turkey sandwich for the road, kissing me deeply at the front door and telling me to text her when I arrived at the hotel. The level of casual deception she was capable of made my skin crawl. I drove out of the neighborhood, but instead of heading toward the highway, I checked into a cheap motel 20 minutes away from our house. I sat on the edge of a scratchy polyester bedspread, my laptop open on my knees, staring at the live feed from the bedroom camera app on my phone. It didn't take long. By 8 in the evening, the camera feed flickered to life as the motion sensors were triggered. The door to our bedroom pushed open, and Sarah walked in, followed closely by Marcus. They weren't even trying to be discreet anymore. Marcus was holding a bottle of expensive wine, the one I had bought for our upcoming wedding anniversary, and 2 glasses. They laughed, clinking the glasses together before Marcus pulled her into a deep, aggressive kiss. I sat there in that dark motel room, watching my best friend crawl into my bed with my wife. The video crystal clear, the audio picking up every whispered confession, every giggle, every terrible, heartbreaking sound of their betrayal. My chest felt like it was being crushed under a semi-truck. I wanted to slam my laptop shut, to drive over there and smash the door down, but I forced myself to watch. I needed to see it. I needed to let the pain burn away any remaining shred of love or hesitation I had left for either of them. I recorded everything, saving the files directly to a secure cloud drive, and then sent a duplicate copy straight to Victoria's private email. The next morning, I drove back to the house at my usual time, pretending I'd just survived a grueling 4-hour morning commute. Sarah was in the kitchen, wearing her robe, making pancakes. Marcus was at the table, scrolling through his phone. "Hey, stranger," Sarah said, looking up with a bright, sunny smile. "How was Cincinnati? You look exhausted." "Yeah, traffic on I-75 was an absolute nightmare," I said, leaning over the counter to grab a cup of coffee.
I looked over at Marcus. Any luck on those job interviews, man? Marcus shook his head, looking appropriately disappointed. Nah, bro, same old story. We'll keep your resume on file. It's brutal out there. I really appreciate you letting me stay another week, man. I'm hoping something breaks loose soon.
Take your time, I said, taking a sip of the coffee. I want to make sure you're fully back on your feet before you move out. We're family, Marcus. I've got your back. He smiled, a genuine, warm smile that made me realize he felt absolutely no guilt whatsoever. He didn't see me as a brother. He saw me as a mark, a fool who was funding his lifestyle and providing him with a comfortable place to sleep with my wife. That was the moment I stopped feeling sad. The grief completely vanished, replaced by a pure, unadulterated desire for total destruction. They thought they were smarter than me. They thought they had successfully engineered a perfect setup where I did all the heavy lifting while they reaped the rewards. Over the next few days, I worked closely with Victoria to quietly move my personal savings into a separate, unlinked account. I gathered all the paperwork for the house, the car titles, and our joint financial statements. Because I had definitive, undeniable video evidence of the affair occurring inside the marital home, Victoria was able to fast-track an aggressive divorce filing, along with a temporary restraining order that would legally compel both Sarah and Marcus to vacate the property immediately upon being served. I decided the execution needed to happen on Friday afternoon. I knew Marcus had a rare legitimate meeting with a freelance client at 2 in the afternoon, and Sarah was planning to go to a local spot with her sister around the same time. It was the perfect window. I took the day off work, telling my boss it was a family emergency. As soon as both of their cars pulled out of the driveway, I swung into action. I didn't pack Sarah's things with care. I went down to the basement, grabbed a dozen heavy-duty black trash bags, and marched upstairs to our bedroom. I tore her clothes out of the closet, ripping them off the hangers and stuffed them into the bags. I emptied her vanity, dumping her expensive makeup, perfumes, and jewelry into the plastic sacks. I went down to the living room and did the exact same thing to Marcus's belongings. His shoes, his clothes, his gaming console, his stupid sentimental childhood photos, everything went into the trash bags. By 3 in the afternoon, the front lawn of our pristine suburban home looked like a landfill. 12 massive black trash bags were lined up along the curb, right next to the recycling bins. I took Marcus's folding cot from the living room, dragged it out to the driveway, and smashed it to pieces with a sledgehammer from the garage, leaving the twisted metal debris in a heap. Then, I sat down on the front porch steps with a cold beer, waiting for the process server to arrive. Victoria had coordinated everything perfectly. The local sheriff's deputy, who doubles as a legal courier, pulled up to the curb at exactly 3:30. He was a tall, imposing man named Miller, and he gave me a sympathetic nod as he walked up the driveway holding the bright manila envelopes containing the divorce papers and the emergency eviction order. "You ready for this, son?" Deputy Miller asked, his voice low and gravelly. "I've been ready for 2 weeks," I said, taking a long sip of my beer. "Let's finish it." At exactly 4 o'clock, the familiar hum of Sarah's SUV echoed down the quiet suburban street. A few moments later, Marcus's silver sedan followed closely behind her, pulling up to the curb right next to the mountain of black trash bags. I sat perfectly still on the top step of the porch, the cold beer bottle sweating in my hand, watching through the late afternoon sun as their vehicles came to a halt. I saw the exact moment the confusion set in. Sarah sat in her idling car for a long moment, staring through the windshield at the sidewalk. Marcus got out of his sedan first, slamming the door, his brow furrowed as he walked up to the pile of garbage bags. He reached down, tearing open the top of one bag, and his face instantly drained of all color. He looked up toward the porch, his eyes locking onto mine, his mouth hanging slightly open. Sarah climbed out of her SUV a second later, her designer sunglasses pushed up onto her head, her face a mask of bewildered irritation. "What is going on here?" Sarah yelled, marching up the driveway, her voice echoing off the neighbors' houses. "Babe, what is this?" "Why is Marcus's stuff on the lawn? Why is my stuff out here?" Deputy Miller stepped out from the shadow of the garage, holding the thick manila envelopes. His heavy boots crunched loudly on the gravel as he intercepted them at the bottom of the porch steps.
Sarah Vance? The deputy asked, his voice booming with legal authority. Yes, she stammered, looking frantically between the officer and me. What is this? You're being served, Deputy Miller said flatly, thrusting the first envelope into her hands. These are legal documents for a dissolution of marriage, along with an emergency ex parte restraining order and a temporary order of exclusive occupancy for this residence. You have 15 minutes to gather any immediate personal essentials not located on the curb and vacate the premises. Sarah froze, the envelope heavy in her hands. She looked down at the bold legal lettering of the county court, then up at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and sudden, blooming panic. What? No, this is a mistake. Babe, what are you doing? What is this about? Marcus stepped forward, trying to adopt his usual protective, aggressive stance, but his voice shook. Hey man, whatever you think is going on. Marcus Vance? Deputy Miller interrupted, turning his massive frame toward my best friend. You're being served with a formal trespass warning and an immediate order to vacate. If you step foot past these porch steps, you will be arrested on site. Do you understand?
Marcus went completely rigid. He looked at the envelope in his hand, then looked back at me, the arrogant, confident facade he'd worn for the past month completely evaporating. Bro, come on, let's just talk about this. Let's go inside and talk. I finally stood up from the porch step, setting the beer bottle down with a deliberate click. I walked down to the edge of the porch, looking down at the two of them. For weeks, I had imagined what I would say in this exact moment. I thought I would scream, curse, or throw their betrayal back in their faces. But looking at them now, standing in the driveway, looking small, trapped, and utterly pathetic, I felt nothing but a profound, icy clarity. I was home on Thursday night 2 weeks ago, Marcus, I said, my voice incredibly calm, cutting through the heavy afternoon air. I came home early from Indianapolis to surprise my wife. I stood in the hallway outside my bedroom door. I heard everything. The silence that followed was absolute. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, her face turning a ghostly, sickly shade of white. Marcus looked down at the asphalt, unable to maintain eye contact for even a fraction of a second. The brazen, casual liars who had mocked my intelligence over pancakes and donuts were completely gone, replaced by two cowards caught in the blinding glare of their own sins. I know about the last year, Sarah, I continued, staring directly at my wife. I know how lonely you were. I know about the wine. I know about my bed. And just so we're completely clear on how this divorce is going to go, I have high-definition video and audio of every single thing you two did in my house while I was out working to pay for it. My lawyer already has it. The court already has it. Your sister is going to get a copy. Your parents are going to get a copy. And Marcus, your ex-fiancé, is getting one too. Please, Sarah whispered, a sob tearing from her throat as she took a step toward the porch. Please, it was a mistake. I was lonely. I didn't mean to. Marcus manipulated me. He came on to me, I swear. Hey, that's a lie, Marcus snapped, turning on her instantly, his survival instinct kicking in as the reality of his ruined reputation crashed down on him. You're the one who came to the living room. You're the one who told me he didn't care about you. Watching them turn on each other in a matter of seconds was the most validating, disgusting thing I had ever witnessed. The great, passionate love affair they had used to justify destroying my life didn't even survive the first 5 minutes of accountability. 15 minutes, ma'am? Deputy Miller reminded her, checking his watch and stepping between Sarah and the porch. Pick up your bags and clear the property. Sarah collapsed into tears, dropping to her knees on the driveway next to the black trash bags, desperately trying to gather her scattered cosmetics from the pavement. Marcus didn't even offer to help her. He aggressively stuffed as many of his own bags into the trunk and back seat of his sedan as he could fit, his face twisted in a mixture of rage and humiliation. He didn't look at me again. He got into his car, started the engine, and tore out of the driveway, the tires screeching against the asphalt, leaving his accomplice crying on the ground. Sarah eventually loaded the rest of her things into her SUV, her eyes swollen, her chest heaving with silent, desperate sobs. She looked up at me one last time from the driver's seat, begging with her eyes for some shred of the soft, forgiving husband she thought she knew. I just stood there, my arms crossed, watching her pull away from the curb until her taillights disappeared around the corner of the subdivision. When the street was quiet again, Deputy Miller gave me a firm nod,
walked back to his cruiser, and drove away, leaving me completely alone in the afternoon light. I walked back inside the house, locking the heavy deadbolt behind me. The silence inside was different now. It wasn't the suffocating, tense silence of the last 2 weeks. It was clean. It was empty. I walked up the stairs, entered our bedroom, and stripped the sheets off the mattress. I dragged the heavy mattress down the stairs, out the back door, and onto the patio. I grabbed a can of lighter fluid from the garage, doused the fabric, and struck a match. I sat on the back deck, watching the flames consume the last physical remnant of the lie I had been living.
The smoke rose up into the clear blue sky, carrying away the ghost of my best friend and the woman I used to love. I knew the road ahead was going to be long, bitter, and legally exhausting, but as I watched the fire burn down to ash, I took my first real, deep breath in a very long time. I was broken, but I was free.